Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Ultramarines, the 13th Legion, led by the man who literally wrote the book on Space Marines, although not for a few years until after this game. In this video, we're going to talk about the Legion trait and the advanced reaction, the Warlord traits, and also the Armoury of the Ultramarines as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback or any comments on the video at all, please leave them in the YouTube comments down below. And now on with the show. The Ultramarines Legion trait is called the Strength of Wisdom. So it gives you +1 to hit when another unit from your army has already shot at the same target and that unit that is shooting is within 6 of your new unit that's shooting. So this is really good for getting +1 to hit where you need it. And unlike the Imperial Fist bonus, for example, which only works on certain weapons, this only works where you trigger it, but it can work on any weapon and it can work on any unit as well, vehicles, dreadnoughts, infantry, any of it at all. It's pretty easy to trigger this by just making sure that you've got something that is, simple and is not an important shooting unit near the things that are important to shoot, or trigger it with things that don't need the bonus. So, for example, a dreadnought that probably already hits on a 2 can trigger this bonus for a nearby heavy support squad, or something like a rhino can trigger this for something else that's nearby. Maybe another tank or a tactical squad can trigger it for a tactical support squad or something like that. It's very thematic and it's very Ultramarines, the whole combined arms thing. But, when you put it into a game context, you can basically use your less powerful shooting units to make sure your bigger ones do get the bonuses. So it's really good. Certainly in the early turns, it's not that far off an army-wide +1 to hit, I don't think, in a lot of ways. Now, it does only work in the shooting phase. Technically can work in the enemy shooting phase, but that's very unlikely. So you're not going to get these bonuses in Overwatch or using return fire or anything like that most of the time. It is a powerful Legion trait, no doubt. It's a very, very good Legion trait, especially if your army is leaning into the shooting or just to make sure your key units get the shooting bonuses off. It's very good that it can also affect your vehicles and that kind of stuff too. But it does require proper planning. It does require you to bring the right units to trigger it, to play your army in a certain way, to set your army up in a certain way because of the 6-inch range. And that's really good. A bonus that is conditional on you playing it properly is exactly the kind of thing that we like to see in games of Warhammer. It also means your opponent can do stuff about it by shooting your units that are next to each other, so one of them, won't have a bonus next turn, or you will have to move around to get a bonus and that kind of stuff. It is going to drop off as the game goes on, so as you lose some units, or as your army has to move around, maybe for objectives, or because your opponent's assaulting you, or to get line of sight and that kind of stuff, it's going to get harder and harder to use, so it's certainly going to be more powerful in the early game when you've got more units on the board and more units to trigger it for each other. Then we've got the advanced reaction, so it's called Unity of Purpose. This lets you return fire with the unit that's being shot and another unit at the same time. No range limitations or anything like that. Wow, that's really good. That's really powerful. There are some other reactions that let you double return fire or double shoot, but it's with the same unit, and they both give you Get Hot as well. One's Iron Hands, one is Iron Warriors. So this makes playing around your powerful return fire units very difficult. One of the ways to avoid return fire is just by not shooting the unit with that's going to return fire at you and just shooting some easier targets, or maybe shooting some things that aren't in range. But if you've got a big unit of like 10 las cannons or a dreadnought or a big tank or something like that, your opponent can't avoid the return fire from those things just by shooting something else. The other way to play around return fire is, let's say you have got a tank that's bristling with Volkite weapons, or let's say you've got a unit of 10 las cannons, you shoot the las cannons with some tactical marines, or you shoot at a dreadnought, like a Leviathan dreadnought, with something that's out of range, that it's out of range to return fire at, or something like that. You shoot at things that struggle to return fire. You've always got your powerful return fire unit to return fire with by using this. It's just generally a very powerful reaction. You can hold this to force your opponent to try to play around it because they're scared of a powerful return fire from one of your units, or you can just blow it early and make sure, you're guaranteeing yourself getting a free shot early in the game with something big. It's a very powerful advanced reaction. you're always going to find a use for this. There's other powerful advanced reactions in the game that sometimes you will spend the whole game not using because the opponent will play around them, or because you just don't get a chance to. For example, I mentioned the Iron Hands double return fire in an assault earlier on. Often, although it's very good, it doesn't come up in a game. You don't actually get a chance to use it for one reason or another, whereas this you will always get a chance to use. You'll always get a chance to get that free extra return fire, and that makes this a very good advanced reaction. Then on to the Warlord traits. So we've got the Burden of Kings, which is loyalist only. So when your Warlord takes a wound, you can trigger this, and then until the end of your next turn, you get It Will Not Die 4+ and Fearless. Now that's a pretty good buff, but it can go on for 2 or 3 even player turns. It's quite a long time that it can last, but it is quite hard to trigger that. Your Warlord taking some wounds and not dying from them is not a thing that happens super often. I mean, Warlords don't get hit that often to begin with, but getting hit and not dying happens even less, and therefore the value of this is questionable. It does give you a free reaction in any phase, but only with the Warlord's unit. So, arguably, you could put this in a unit that was, maybe a unit that's good at shooting and assault, or a unit that's a close-range shooting unit that's going to be moving forward, where you might want to return fire and Overwatch with it in the same, or have the option to do return fire or Overwatch as well, or do both of them in the same turn, because you use, one normal reaction and your Warlord's one, or something like that. That is pretty good, but you're effectively getting a relatively weak passive bonus in return for the, the bonus on that reaction, really. So I don't think this is a fantastic Warlord trait, but it's definitely interesting, definitely one I could see people taking. Then we've got the Aegis of Wisdom. So you regroup on the Warlord's leadership when you can see him, and you can act as normal in a turn in which you regroup. So this is very Games Workshop representation of Ultramarines. They've always had rules around regrouping and retreating and that kind of stuff over the years. So thematically, at least as far as the way Ultramarines have always been written, this makes sense. It's not actually that good, really. Regrouping doesn't often happen in the game, really. A lot of the time when units break, it's either because they are running away from combat, or it's because they've lost so many models that when you do regroup them, it's actually not that relevant. If you break because you've taken a lot of firepower and you've got a couple of models left, being able to regroup on the Warlord's leadership and act as normal is maybe not that big a deal. Yes, it's a nice guarantee. If a unit of 10 guys loses 3 models and it happens to break, it's nice in that situation, but that's just so uncommon. It does give you a shooting phase reaction. Even though it's not great, depending on what your army does, if you're just looking to get a shooting phase reaction, which I think Ultramarines will be a lot of the time, this still could be preferable to the Stoic Defender Warlord trait from the book, which gives you pinning with the Warlord's unit, which is, possible thing to do. So whilst I don't think this Warlord trait is brilliant, it is a potential alternative to that. Then we've got Pride's Dark Power, which is traitor only. This is pretty crazy. 1 phase per game, you can choose to use your Warlord's leadership in place of his toughness. So that's going to be 9 or 10 most of the time for that phase. Your Warlord becomes semi-indestructible. It doesn't mean he's not going to take wounds. Very hard to kill a toughness 9 or 10 model, and some weapons straight up won't be able to hurt him. If you're fighting things that have got power weapons, for example, normal power weapons, they're probably not going to be able to hurt him. If you're fighting things like Thunderhammers, they're probably going to need 5s or 6s to wound you. It's pretty great, but you do note it does not on versus Fleshbane or Rend, or those kind of things are still gonna go through the Warlord's toughness. Only being 1 phase a game as well is very, very limited, so you really need to make sure that whatever you do with it is game-changingly impactful. If the Warlord's in a unit of 3 or more models, so if the Warlord's in a unit with at least 2 of the models, this also won't do anything outside of a challenge, because of the way the majority toughness rules work. It's very good if you do use it for winning or surviving a key duel. If you pop this in a duel and you're not fighting against one of the many special characters that have got Fleshbane, or something like a Raven Guard Praetor with a pair of Talons with high Rend or something like that, you're probably going to win the duel, or at least you're going to live through the duel. It will pair up very well for that reason with something like a Thunder Hammer to make sure you survive and then you just smash whatever was fighting you, for example. That's kind of good, but it is only going to be one turn in the game, one phase in the game even. You could, in theory, hold up a key unit for a turn in melee, so your Warlord's with his unit, he leaves the unit, charges an enemy unit, pops that, goes to toughness 10, he lives, maybe kills a few guys, and then, next turn, he's still in combat with them, maybe he does it again. There's a bunch of really interesting stuff you can do with this, and it gives you an assault phase reaction, which is not bad at all either. So ultimately, all around, probably not super powerful Warlord trait, because it's just only one phase, but it's very, very cool, and very, very thematic, if you think about, what the guy's actually invoking when he does this. For equipment, the Ultramarines have got the Legatine Axe, which is an AP2 axe, strength user, that strikes at initiative. One of the very few things in the game, and even less of them, or maybe none, that aren't on special characters, I think. Things that are AP2 but strike at initiative, that's very, very powerful. Very simple, incredibly good, especially considering the units that can take it. You got 2 units of Ultramarines that can take these on their entire unit in their special units. Otherwise, it's just for independent characters. Potentially, like a lot of power with this. Very, very good weapon. You are going to lose out on some damage with the needing to roll to wound at strength, but going through things at AP2 at initiative is really, really good. Similarly, they've got the Argyran Pattern Board and Shield, which is another simple item. It's a board and shield with a 4+ invulnerable save in melee. Just very good, very powerful upgrade. 15 points for an independent character, which is quite expensive, but the independent characters you're going to take it on are generally, it's going to be worth it on. It's going to be worth it on something like a Centurion, who might want to just get that extra save if he's in power armor or something like that. Meaning that he's tougher in combat, but he can still sweep enemy units. But again, this is most powerful on the Ultramarine special units that take it as default. Lastly, there's the Mantles of Ultramar, so this is effectively 25 points to change your Artificer armor into a special set of armor that's still got a 2+ save, but also gives you Battle Hardened 1. Now, that is very, very powerful in my opinion. Anything that makes you harder to instant death in a duel for your big characters is super, super important. It means that you'll easily win duels versus a lot of enemies that don't have any way around this. So if they're not strength 10, or they're not packing a Paragon Blade and manage to get a 6 that you don't save, you're probably going to kill most things. Anything like this that makes you immune to instant death pairs really well with a Thunder Hammer, the idea being that anyone who goes before you isn't going to be able to cause enough wounds to stop you smashing their face in with a Thunder Hammer at initiative 1, so that's really good. The only thing you've got to watch out for is, again, a lucky Paragon Blade, 6 to wound that you also fail your save for. But, if you're bringing your Argyran Pattern Board and Shield, or you're just a Praetor in the first place, you've even got a 4+ save against that as well. It also gives you blind immunity, which is kind of random. There's not that many things in the game that blind, but sure, useful, extra throw-in. You're buying it for the Battle Hardened, really. And that's it for the Ultramarines book. Quite short, actually. They've got an excellent Legion trait, which does require some careful planning and good play to maximise the benefits off, which, as I said before, is really, really good. Anything that promotes you actually playing and making decisions to get bonuses is generally, good for Warhammer. They've got an excellent advanced reaction, powerful and very easy to get value out of as well, which is a big deal. Thematic, but ultimately quite mediocre Warlord traits, so I think a lot of the time you might end up taking ones out the book instead, but these ones are, good alternatives to the book ones. They're maybe just not as powerful as the ones that some of the other Legions get. They've got fantastic, efficient, but very simple equipment. It's very Ultramarines, I think. There's nothing flashy about what they do, nothing super cool or anything like that. It's just efficient and simple and basic, and it really gets the job done in the most effective way possible. The Armoury is definitely a little light, though. There's not a lot of rules here. The rules that there are very simplistic. There's nothing flashy or cool or super interesting. It's just, an axe that's AP2. Very simple. But what they do have as a package, the Legion trait, the reaction, maybe not the Warlord trait so much, but the equipment is very, very powerful. And when you combine this with their special units, which we'll talk about in part 2 of this faction review, you'll see how all these things combine together to make Ultramarines very, very good. That's the end of the episode. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube. And if you've got any comments or feedback at all, please leave them in the YouTube comments down below. See you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.